I sat across from Mark at our dining table, the evening light filtering through the windows, casting a warm glow over our cozy home. Everything seemed perfect, until he dropped those fateful words that shattered my world. "There's something you need to know, Emily." His voice trembled, and he couldn't meet my gaze. A knot formed in my stomach as I lowered my magazine. "What is it, Mark?" He took a deep breath, his eyes downcast. "We need to get a divorce." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. "What? Why?" Mark's shoulders slumped, and he finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I've been in love with someone else for years. Her name is Heather, and she's pregnant with my child." Time seemed to freeze as his confession sank in. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been lying to me all this time. Tears stung my eyes, and a lump formed in my throat, making it hard to breathe. "How could you do this to me?" I choked out, my voice cracking with emotion. "To our marriage?" Mark's expression softened, but it did little to ease the ache in my chest. "I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you, but I can't keep living a lie. I love Heather, and I want to be with her and our child." Anger flared within me, burning away the initial shock and hurt. "So what? Our 5 years together meant nothing to you?" He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "Of course they did, but sometimes love fades and people grow apart." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back?" Mark's gaze dropped once more, and he fidgeted in his chair. "A few years," he mumbled. My heart shattered into a million pieces. The man I thought I knew was nothing but a fraud, a snake who had betrayed my trust in the cruelest way possible. In that moment, something hardened within me. I would not be a victim. I would not let this break me. Mark had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Mark's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and stood from the table, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our once happy life. As I sat there, tears streaming down my face, I made a vow to myself. Mark would pay for what he had done. I would make sure of it. The next day at work, I felt like a zombie, barely able to focus on the tasks at hand. The weight of Mark's betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, and I knew I needed to confide in someone I could trust. During our lunch break, I caught up with my friend and colleague, Laura, in the cafeteria. As we settled at a table, she immediately noticed the dark circles under my eyes and my somber demeanor. "Emily, what's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Mark wants a divorce." Laura's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Why?" The words tumbled out like opening a floodgate of pent-up emotion. "He's been cheating on me for years with some woman named Heather, and she's pregnant with his child." Laura's hand flew to her mouth, her expression a mix of shock and anger. "That bastard," she hissed. "I'm so sorry, Emily. You don't deserve this." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I know. And the worst part is, he acted like it was nothing, like our 5 years of marriage meant nothing to him." Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's because he's a selfish prick who only cares about himself." Her words rang true, and I felt a surge of anger coursing through me. "You're right. He is selfish, and he's going to pay for what he's done." Laura leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. "I'm not going to let him get away with this. He thinks he can just toss me aside and start a new life with his mistress? Not a chance." Laura's eyes narrowed. "What are you going to do?" "First, I'm going to hire a private investigator," I said, my voice steady and determined. "I need to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. If Mark has been cheating for years, there's no telling what else he's been hiding from me." Laura nodded slowly, a sly smile spreading across her lips. "Good idea. We need to gather as much dirt on him as possible." "Exactly," I said, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me. "And then we'll use it to make sure I get everything I deserve in the divorce." Laura's smile turned feral. "That's my girl. We'll make sure that bastard pays for what he's done." As we finished our lunch, I felt a newfound resolve coursing through my veins. Mark had made a mistake, thinking he could walk all over me and discard our marriage like it meant nothing. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Later that day, as I sat at my desk, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Pushing through the discomfort, I made a mental note to schedule a doctor's appointment, just to be on the safe side. Little did I know, the real bombshell was yet to come. A few days later, I found myself sitting in the doctor's office, nervously tapping my foot as I waited for the results. The nausea and fatigue had only gotten worse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When the doctor finally called me back, her expression was unreadable. "Well, Miss Anderson, the tests confirm that you're pregnant." The words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Pregnant? With Mark's child? The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. "Are you sure?" I managed to choke out, my mouth suddenly dry. The doctor nodded, a hint of sympathy in her eyes. "Yes, I'm afraid there's no doubt about it. Congratulations are in order, I suppose." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Congratulations? My husband just left me for another woman who's also pregnant with his child. This is the last thing I expected." The doctor's expression softened. "I understand this must be a difficult situation, but try to focus on the positives. You're bringing a new life into the world, and that's something to be celebrated." I nodded numbly, my mind racing with a million thoughts and emotions. On the one hand, the idea of having a child filled me with joy and hope for the future. But on the other hand, the fact that it was Mark's child, conceived during a time when he was betraying me with another woman, left a bitter taste in my mouth. As I left the doctor's office, I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to embrace this new chapter, to focus on the love and nurturing that comes with motherhood. But another part of me couldn't shake the anger and resentment towards Mark, the man who had so callously thrown our marriage away. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sank onto the couch, my hand instinctively resting on my still flat stomach. A million questions raced through my mind. How would I tell Mark? Would he even care? Would he try to use this as leverage against me in the divorce? As the hours ticked by, I came to a decision. I would tell Mark about the pregnancy, but not because I expected him to change his mind or come back to me. No, I would tell him because he deserved to know the full extent of the consequences of his actions. The next day, I steeled my nerves and called Mark, asking him to come over so we could talk. When he arrived, he looked uncomfortable, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "What's going on, Emily?" he asked, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with a steely resolve. "I'm pregnant, Mark, with your child." His eyes widened and his mouth hung open in shock. "What? How?" I couldn't help but scoff at his incredulity. "How do you think, Mark? We were still together when this happened, remember?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. "But I thought, with Heather." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Mark. I don't need your excuses or your pity. I'm telling you this not because I expect anything from you, but because you need to understand the gravity of what you've done." His shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Well, it did," I said, my voice hard as steel. "And now you're going to have to live with the consequences, just like me." As he left, I felt a strange sense of empowerment wash over me. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I would be okay. I had the strength and determination to get through this, with or without Mark by my side. And if he thought he could just waltz back into my life and play the doting father, he had another thing coming. A few days after breaking the news of my pregnancy to Mark, I found myself pacing the living room floor, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me still clung to the hope that this child might be the wake-up call he needed, that he would come to his senses and realize the mistake he was making. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my thoughts, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. When I opened the door, Mark stood on the other side, his expression a mix of guilt and determination. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I crossed my arms over my chest, watching him warily. "About what?" He turned to face me, his eyes pleading. "About the baby. About us." I scoffed, shaking my head. There is no us anymore, Mark. Atath, you made that clear when you decided to throw away our marriage for some fling. His face fell, and he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Heather is not just some fling, Emily. I love her, and I want to be with her and our child. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my cheeks flush with anger. And what about my child, Mark? The one growing inside me right now? Are you just going to abandon us too? He held up his hands in a placating gesture. Of course not, Emily. I want to be a part of this child's life too. I laughed bitterly. Oh, how generous of you. You want to be a part-time father to my child while you play house with your mistress and her baby. Mark's expression hardened. That's not fair, Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen. Well, it did happen, I shot back, my voice rising. And now you have to face the consequences of your actions. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. Please, Emily, let's not do this. Let's try to work things out for the sake of our child. I shook my head, feeling a surge of resolve coursing through me. No, Mark, you made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to let you waltz back into my life and play the doting father whenever it's convenient for you. His shoulders slumped, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. Emily, please, get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Get out of my house and don't come back unless it's to discuss the divorce proceedings. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but one look at the determination on my face must have convinced him it was futile. With a heavy sigh, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone with the weight of my decision. As the days passed, I found myself hardening my resolve further. Mark had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. I wouldn't allow him to string me along or use the pregnancy as leverage in the divorce. No, I would take control of the situation and ensure that I got everything I deserved, both for myself and for my child. With Laura's help, I started gathering evidence of Mark's infidelity, documenting every lie, every betrayal, and every instance of his deceit. I would make sure that when the divorce proceedings began, I had an ironclad case against him, ensuring that he wouldn't be able to weasel his way out of taking responsibility for his actions. As I sat in my home office, sifting through the mounting evidence, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. Mark had thought he could walk all over me, discard me like a used rag, and move on to greener pastures. But he had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my determination to see justice done. I would make sure that he paid for what he had done in every possible way. And in the end, I would be the one standing tall, with a secure future for myself and my child, while he was left to wallow in the ruins of his own making. With the evidence of Mark's infidelity mounting, I knew it was time to take the next step in my plan for revenge. I called Laura over to my home office, and we pored over the documents and recordings I had gathered, plotting our next move. "This is good, Emily," Laura said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Really good. With all of this, you'll have a solid case in the divorce proceedings." I nodded, a grim smile tugging at my lips. "That's the plan. Mark thinks he can just toss me aside and start a new life with his mistress. He's got another thing coming." Laura leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, though? Divorces can get really messy, especially when there's a kid involved." I met her gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm sure. Mark made his choice, and now he has to face the consequences. I'm not going to let him waltz back into my life and play the doting father whenever it's convenient for him." Laura nodded slowly, a sly smile spreading across her face. "All right, then. Let's make sure he pays for what he's done." With Laura's support and the mounting evidence against Mark, I felt a surge of confidence coursing through me. But I knew that in order to truly secure my future and that of my unborn child, I would need more help. The kind of help that only someone with real power and influence could provide. That's when I decided to reach out to my father, Robert, the CEO of a major corporation. I hadn't spoken to him much since the news of my pregnancy and impending divorce, but I knew he would want to be involved, especially when it came to protecting his grandchild's future. When I called him and explained the situation, he was initially hesitant, urging me to take the high road and avoid any messy legal battles. But as I laid out the evidence against Mark and my plan for revenge, I could sense his resolve wavering. "Are you sure about this, Emily?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Once you set this in motion, there's no going back." I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "I'm sure, Dad. Mark betrayed me in the worst way possible, and he has to face the consequences. I won't let him get away with this, if not when my child's future is at stake." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then finally he spoke. "All right, sweetheart. If this is what you really want, you have my full support. Just say the word, and I'll make sure you have the best lawyers and resources at your disposal." Relief washed over me, knowing that I had my father's backing. With his influence and resources, Mark didn't stand a chance. He had made the mistake of underestimating me, and now he would pay the price for his arrogance. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with my father and the legal team he assembled, building an airtight case against Mark. Every lie, every betrayal, every instance of his deceit was carefully documented and cataloged, creating a mountain of evidence that would be impossible for him to refute. As the legal proceedings began, I could see the panic in Mark's eyes as he realized just how much trouble he was in. His lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, but I was resolute. I wanted everything, and I wouldn't rest until I got it. Throughout the process, Mark tried to plead with me, to appeal to my sense of compassion and the love we once shared. But every time I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had shattered my trust and thrown away our marriage like it was nothing. And so I pressed on, my determination fueled by the burning desire for justice and the knowledge that I was doing this for the sake of my child, to ensure that they would never have to suffer the same kind of betrayal and heartbreak that I had endured. The day of the divorce proceedings, I strode into the lawyer's office with my head held high, my father and Laura by my side. Mark and his attorney were already there, and the tension in the room was palpable. As we took our seats, Mark leaned over and tried to catch my eye. "Emily, please, can we talk about this? I don't want it to come to this." I met his gaze, my expression cold and detached. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You made your choice, and now it's time to face the consequences." He opened his mouth to respond, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. The proceedings began, and for the next several hours, we systematically laid out the evidence of Mark's infidelity and betrayal. With each piece of damning evidence presented, I could see the color draining from Mark's face. His lawyer tried to object and deflect, but the mountain of proof was undeniable. Recordings of Mark's secret liaisons, bank statements showing unexplained expenditures, and even private investigator reports detailing his sordid affairs, it was all there laid bare for the world to see. As the hours ticked by, Mark's composure began to crumble. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. At one point, he turned to me, tears in his eyes, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." But it was too little, too late. I simply stared back at him, my expression unwavering, resolute in my determination to see justice served. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat and delivered the verdict. Mark would be required to pay a substantial settlement, covering child support for our unborn child as well as alimony and other costs. He would also be forced to sell off several assets, including the house we had once shared, to cover the financial obligations. As the terms were read aloud, I could see the defeat in Mark's eyes. He had gambled everything on his affair with Heather, convinced that he could discard me and start anew without consequence. But he had underestimated my resolve, my strength, and my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. After the proceedings concluded, Mark tried to approach me one last time. "Emily, please, can we talk? I never wanted to hurt you like this." I turned to face him, my expression steely and unwavering. "You had your chance, Mark. You chose to throw away our marriage for a fling, and now you have to live with the consequences." He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't bother. It's over, Mark. You've lost everything. Your job, your money, and most importantly, your family." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone, the weight of his decisions finally catching up to him. In the weeks that followed, I focused on preparing for the arrival of my child, determined to create a secure and loving environment for them. Mark's betrayal still stung, but the satisfaction of seeing him face the consequences of his actions helped to dull the pain. As I settled into my new apartment, a sense of peace washed over me. I had taken control of my life, reclaimed my power, and ensured that my child would never have to suffer the same heartbreak and betrayal that I had endured. And as for Mark, well, let's just say that his troubles were only just beginning. In the months following the divorce, my life took an unexpected turn. Thanks to my father's mentorship and influence, I found myself rising through the ranks of the corporate world at a breakneck pace. It was a sharp contrast to the struggles Mark was facing in the wake of our split. Word of his infidelity had spread like wildfire, and before long he found himself out of a job, his once promising career in shambles. I'll never forget the day I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked like a shell of his former self, disheveled, unshaven, and carrying a burden of defeat on his shoulders. When he saw me, his eyes widened, and he quickly tried to duck down an aisle, but I called out to him, "Mark, is that you?" He froze, his shoulders slumping in resignation as he turned to face me. "Emily," he mumbled, unable to meet my gaze. "I barely recognized you," I said, taking in his appearance. "Life's been tough, I take it?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You could say that. After everything that happened, I lost my job, my house, pretty much everything." A part of me felt a twinge of pity for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. This was the price he had to pay for his betrayal. "And what about Heather?" I asked, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little bit. "I assume she's sticking by your side through all of this?" Mark's expression darkened, and he averted his gaze. "Heather left me," he muttered. "Once she found out I was broke, she took off. Said she didn't sign up for this." I couldn't help but let out a laugh at the irony of it all. "Well, what did you expect, Mark? You threw away a perfectly good marriage for her, and now she's done the same to you." His jaw clenched, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You don't have to rub it in, Emily. I know I screwed up, okay? I've paid the price for my mistakes." "Have you, though?" I countered, taking a step closer to him. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still living in denial. You haven't truly faced the consequences of your actions." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me make something clear, Mark. You lost everything because of your own greed and selfishness. You chose to betray me, to throw away our marriage for a fling, and now you're reaping what you've sown." His shoulders slumped, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. He knew I was right. "I hope you learn from this, Mark," I continued. "I hope you understand the pain and heartbreak you've caused, not just to me, but to everyone around you. Because if you don't, you're destined to repeat the same mistakes over and over again." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone, a broken man consumed by the weight of his own actions. As I made my way through the rest of the store, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't just the fact that I had won the divorce settlement or that I was thriving in my career. No, what truly mattered was that I had taken control of my life, refused to be a victim, and ensured that Mark faced the consequences of his betrayal. And as I rubbed my growing belly, feeling the gentle flutter of my unborn child, I knew that I had made the right choice. My child would never have to endure the pain and heartbreak that I had experienced. They would grow up knowing that their mother was a strong, resilient woman who fought for justice and refused to let anyone take advantage of her. From that day on, I vowed to be the best mother I could be, pouring all of my love and energy into creating a secure, nurturing environment for my child. And as for Mark, well, he would have to find his own way, living with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. The months flew by, and before I knew it, I found myself sitting in the plush leather chair of the CEO's office, the very same chair my father had occupied for decades. As I looked around at the sleek modern decor and breathtaking views of the city's skyline, a sense of pride and accomplishment washed over me. I had come so far, rising through the ranks with a determination and drive that had left my colleagues in awe. And now, here I was, taking over the reins of the company from my father, ready to lead it into a new era of success. As I settled into my new role, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain and heartbreak of Mark's betrayal, the grueling legal battle, and the long road to rebuilding my life, it had all been worth it to get to where I was today. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see my assistant poking her head in. "Miss Anderson, you have a visitor." I frowned, glancing at my schedule. "I don't have any appointments scheduled for this afternoon." The assistant shifted uncomfortably. "It's your ex-husband, Mark. He's insisting on seeing you." A flicker of annoyance flickered within me, but I quickly tamped it down. Of course Mark would show up unannounced, thinking he could just waltz back into my life whenever it suited him. "Send him in," I said, straightening in my chair and adopting a cool, professional demeanor. A few moments later the door opened and Mark stepped into the office. He looked even more disheveled than the last time I'd seen him, his clothes rumpled and his eyes sunken. It was clear that life had not been kind to him since our divorce. "Emily," he said, his voice strained, "thank you for seeing me." I arched an eyebrow, refusing to let him see how his presence affected me. "What do you want, Mark?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting around the opulent office. I wanted to apologize for everything." I let out a derisive snort. "A little late for that, don't you think?" His shoulders slumped, and he took a step closer to my desk. "I know I can never make up for what I did to us, but I want you to know that I regret it every single day." "Do you?" I challenged, leaning back in my chair. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're only sorry because you got caught and lost everything." Mark flinched as if I had struck him, but he didn't deny it. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I was selfish and arrogant. I thought I could have it all. The perfect wife, the mistress on the side, the picture-perfect life. But in the end, it all blew up in my face, and I lost everything that truly mattered." I studied him carefully, searching for any hint of deception or manipulation, but all I saw was a broken man, a shadow of his former self, consumed by the weight of his own mistakes. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand the gravity of what I've done, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends, even if it's never enough." A heavy silence hung in the air, and for a moment I considered offering him a sliver of forgiveness, a chance to absolve himself of the guilt that so clearly weighed him down. But then I remembered the pain he had caused, the trust he had shattered, and the future he had nearly robbed from me and my child. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice low and steady. "You can't make amends for what you've done, not to me, and certainly not to our child." His eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "This child will grow up knowing the truth about their father, that he was a selfish, deceitful man who valued his own desires above everything else. They will know that you betrayed us in the worst possible way, and that you were too weak and cowardly to face the consequences." Mark's face crumpled, and I could see the impact of my words hitting him like a physical blow. But I didn't stop there. "You had your chance at happiness, Mark. You had a loving wife and the opportunity to be a father, but you threw it all away for a fleeting moment of pleasure. And now you'll have to live with that regret for the rest of your life." He opened his mouth, perhaps to plead or beg for forgiveness, but I held up my hand once more. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "And don't bother coming back. You lost the right to be a part of our lives a long time ago." With that, I turned away from him, dismissing him from my presence and my life once and for all. As he shuffled out of the office, his shoulders hunched in defeat, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had faced the demons of my past, confronted the man who had nearly destroyed me, and emerged victorious. I had claimed my future with strength and resilience, leaving Mark to face the consequences of his betrayals alone, a cautionary tale of greed and deception. And as I gazed out over the city skyline, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, secure in the knowledge that I was a survivor, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with.